shortly. Awesome. So something that we would really love to share with everybody is just how we can design for trust. I think as Estrella Studio, something that really we resonate with when we create user interfaces and user experiences is that we always want to kind of allow our users or our humans to feel that they're in a safe place and not be too bombarding. And I think Estrella as a whole also really leads with empathy, and it's something we bring in our day-to-day exercises too. So the topic of conversation today is just designing for trust, when UX becomes more of a human experience than an actual user experience. So next up is just the agenda to take you guys through a little bit about what we will be discussing today. So firstly, I'm sure no one really knows who I am, or I don't know if anyone has heard of Estrella Studio, but I'm going to give you a quick little introduction as to who Estrella Studio is, who we are. We're going to speak a little bit about the reality of today's online trust gap that we're all facing. Even not just on the designing end, but also what we're facing every day when we're scrolling through apps or user interfaces. The shift from UX to HX, and I'm really excited to introduce what HX actually is, and then kind of just backing that up with some solid UX laws that allow for us to design for trust, and then what our responsibility is as designers and as creatives. So just to kick us off, who is Estrella Studio? So obviously, as you know by now, Kristen and I are designers at Estrella Studio, but we are not just the two of us. We're actually a team of 8. We consist of 6 product designers, and we have a studio operations manager who's full, and of course we have Penelope, who's also our chief happiness officer. And Estrella Studio as a whole, we focus not just on user experiences, which is a big part of what we do, but we also love to dabble in the UI design. So we do app design, we do marketing websites, we do branding. We love a good brand strategy as well. And we're based in Cape Town, except our lovely founder, Natalia, who's based in Vienna. But obviously, being in a digital world, we can all work remotely. So that is us as a team. But then just to go on to just a little bit of a brag into some work we do, and to just make you guys feel a little bit more familiar with the kind of work that we do produce. So I'm just going to share a quick video at a glance into Estrella Studio. Awesome. So as you can see, through the wide variety of projects that we tackle, we love to work with every single brand out there. We love to work in spaces of mental health and wellness. We love to work in fintech. We love to work on booking systems or accommodation or hotels. And with every project that we get tasked, we love to kind of see it in a way from start to finish. And that is, the branding, as I said earlier, the brand strat. We then, once we've created a beautiful brand, we will then also jump into the user experience phase, a lot of UX discovery as well, and then we'll jump into UI and execution. Awesome. So that's just a little bit about us and who we are as Estrella Studio. I'm going to hand it over to you, Chris.
Cool. Thanks, Leigh. Cool. So to understand why trust matters, we need to look at the world that our people step into every day. So we'll be looking at the reality of today's online trust gap. I'd like to start off by asking a simple question, and I really want everyone to think about this. Do you trust what you use online? Do you trust every app that you use, every service you sign into, every notification that you tap without reading? Most people don't. And honestly, I think we've got a pretty good reason not to. Because today, trust isn't a default, it is something that brands have to earn. And this happens interaction by interaction. Stats suggest that 60% of users say that they expect digital services to misuse their data, which I think we can all agree is quite a significant amount. Greater than this, 72% of users abandon financial apps after a single moment of friction, confusion, or perceived invasiveness. So you can really see how we're not designing in a neutral world. We're designing in a world where people assume the worst, and I think we can all agree because we have experienced the worst. Trust is rare, and as people, we can definitely feel it. We all know the culprits, confa shaming, and I think we've definitely seen it. Those guilt-trippy lines like, are you sure you want to stay financially irresponsible? Unsubscribe. Confa shaming in nature is a manipulation tactic used to and designed to guilt-trip people into performing certain actions. So I think we've all had our fair share being personally victimized by Duolingo. If you don't spend a lot of time on the app, you'll be prompted by this little love letter saying that you've hurt Duo's feelings or that they miss you. And yeah, essentially this is just a tactic used to kind of elicit a certain response from a user. Another example here is, an offering that's being presented to you. And instead of just saying, no, thanks, not interested, it's, no, I'm not interested in saving anything. Then we've got fake scarcity and urgency. So things like only one left when we know there's definitely not one left. We know there's probably hundreds of this item sitting somewhere in a warehouse. Another example of this is a sale. So hurry, sale ending soon, when you revisit the same web page the very next day and that clock is reset back to the same. So yeah, another one is hidden costs. So for example, maybe you're going through this whole process, adding things to cart, only suddenly to reach the end of your checkout and you see that there's extra fees that have been added, maybe surcharges, and that can be really frustrating. And of course, manipulative nudges is another one. So things like apps defaulting you into the most expensive option, premium subscriptions, and at worst, with the auto renewal already selected for you. Then we have vague permissions. So those moments when an app asks for your location, maybe they want to know your contacts, but they don't really explain why do we need this information, right? So I'm sure as we've gone through all these examples, there's a couple of websites, maybe even a few apps that have come to mind for you personally. These patterns don't just break usability, they really do break trust. And I think it's important to ask ourselves, why is trust important, right? So there's a quote that we love and firmly stand by. It's by Paul Rand and it reads, "Design is a silent ambassador for your brand." And if you think about it, every interaction either strengthens that ambassador or it turns it into a liability, right? So people judge us by how our products make them feel, especially in the moment that they need it the most or need us the most. Our job as designers isn't to force users through a funnel. It's to reduce anxiety, build understanding, support informed, confident, and comfortable decisions. Because when someone opens a financial app, for example, they're not thinking, wow, look at this beautiful crafted UI, even deep down as designers. It's really nice to know that from time to time. They're thinking and asking themselves a few questions. They're asking, am I safe? Do I understand what's happening? But most importantly, can I trust this app with my money? When those questions are in people's minds, it's no longer just about UX, but it rather becomes HX, right? So we talk a lot about UX, but the users are not endpoints. They're not traffic. They're not conversion events. They're humans, just like all of us gathered here today. We all have shared fears. We have hopes, pressures, deadlines, and a shared loving experience. Here's a simple example. So imagine a loan application flow, right? So UX asks, how do we make this fast? How do we reduce the steps as much as possible? How do we get the user to the end like as quickly as possible? And sure, speed matters, but when money is involved, when people are making decisions that really do affect their lives, fast is not the whole story. Human experience says, this person might be already feeling stressed. They may be ashamed about making the application. They could be at a stage in their life when they feel so incredibly scared. How do we make this feel respectful? And I think that is the clear distinction between these two different design mindsets, right? We clearly have one that optimizes the journey and the other that honors the person in the journey. Trust is not one thing. It is a combination of emotional and cognitive signals that we do send through our choices. So these essentially become the pillars of what we call, or what we use to build trust, essentially. So taking a bit of a deep dive into these pillars that do build trust, the first that we can look at is clarity. So they need to know, what's about to happen before they commit. So an example of this is, I want to change my repayment date. Now, show me exactly what that means. I want to see the new amount. I want to see the new schedule. I want to see, any impact before I confirm or commit to anything. Second is dignity. So as we know, dignity is actually the opposite of manipulation. So guys, no shaming, no tricking, no emotional pressure. So an example of this is, instead of asking, are you sure you want to cancel your protection plan? Say, we'll cancel it for you and you can reactivate it anytime. Empowerment. So this is when a user feels in control. So people trust what they can control and understand. An example of this, when you're asking sensitive questions, such as location permissions or even your contacts, maybe just give a little bit of a background as to, why they need this specifically or why they need your location or your contacts. And then to end off, we have transparency. So if people can see the logic, they're likely to trust the logic, right? So an example of this, breaking a complex cost or maybe a credit calculation into simple and key here, human terms. So guys, let's not use financial jargon that nobody understands. Let's break the copy down into simple human terms that we can all understand. So now that we've explored the pillars of trust, we can turn to specific UX laws that can help us put them into action. And Leigh will take us through those next. Over to you, Leigh.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so I mean, all of those points that Kristen has mentioned is, as I say, or said in the beginning, these are these kind of content or these pillars that we really want to resonate with while designing for user experiences, or let's call it human experiences. And just to back a few of those up, I do want to also surface it out there. It's not literally something that I read in a book just about psychology. There's actually real UX laws out there. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with it. There is about 22 actual UX laws, but just for the sake of time, I'm only going to be covering 4 of these UX laws. And these UX laws are obviously those that we really want to resonate with and just get across to the rest of the audience. So the first one is called Hicks Law. Hicks Law is about clarity and creating clarity for your users. Trust always begins with clarity of purpose and intent. Hicks Law reminds us that simplicity builds understanding and understanding builds trust. So if we look at this if we wanted to look at Hicks law kind of holistically, what does the UX law really tell us? The UX law tells us that the more choices, the harder the decision is for our humans. But if we try to take that and look at it more from a human-centered application, what that truly means, and really simply just says, simplify and explain your intent. When we explain what's happening and why we say you're safe here, users constantly ask, do I understand this? And can I trust you? So just to make this a little bit more fun, I've got a very short exercise. I don't want us to be thinking too hard here, so I just want you to sit with this for these two markups that I have here for 2 seconds. I have an example of one that is maybe not following the Hicks law, and I have one that truly does follow Hicks law. And if you were just to have a look at these two designs, which would you feel is following our Hicks law or the Hicks law a little bit more truly? Correct. I hope you all got it right. It's definitely the one on the right-hand side. And just to motivate the why it is following a little bit more of Hicks' law is you're simplifying your user's process firstly. You're immediately providing clarity in terms of the type of input fields that they'll need or selections that they'll be needing to input or select from. When we hide things behind drop downs, I know drop downs also are really useful, especially if you have loads of item fields. But when we're kind of upfront showing the user what kind of questions we're asking or what the kind of answers are that are available, we're really just providing clarity to our users and our humans, and just being a little bit more clear on intention. So a few takeaways on Hicks' law is always minimize your choices when response times are critical to decrease decision time. Break your complex tasks into smaller steps in order to decrease the cognitive load. I know, obviously, if everything were in radio buttons, it can become really busy. Your page can become extremely long. You'll start introducing a whole bunch of scrolling mechanisms. But how do you break that up into bite sizes to still allow for providing clarity to our humans? Use progressive onboarding to minimize cognitive load for new users. I don't know about you guys, but I love a good onboarding process. I love to see what's next. I love to see what I've done or what I've completed, or even to just browse through the questions that I have answered. Be careful not to simplify to the point of abstraction. I think we're all very guilty, maybe me, of loving minimal so much to the extent of where I want to kind of take away or simplify. But if we simplify too much, we're abstracting really important information for our humans. Awesome. Okay. The next law is familiarity. And this is what we call Jacob's law. And familiarity is about, or familiarity also builds trust with our humans. Familiarity is comfort. And when patterns feel recognizable, people relax. So if we look at Jacob's law, what the actual law represents, it's people spend most of their time on other sites, right? We're all on 1,000, not 1,000, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but we're all on so many websites on a daily. I'm not sure about you guys, but I have an uncountable amount of apps on my phone, going through so many of them. I'm always spending a lot of time on other websites and other apps. And through that, you start recognizing patterns, of course. How do we take Jacob's law and look at it in a more human-centered application? Is let's respect humans' mental models. Familiarity should never erase individuality. People need to feel seen within those patterns. So just another fun exercise. I know we are very short for time here, so I'm not going to spend too much time focusing on this. But again, I have two examples of a product, just a really low fidelity wireframe of a product page. And one really does follow the sense of familiarity and the other one doesn't. Which ones, if you just look at it, would you feel is a little bit more familiar to you over the other? Yep, the one on the left-hand side. Yes, you guys all got it right. Amazing. So definitely the one on the left-hand side. When we are on an e-commerce experience and we are looking at it on mobile or on desktop, we're all so familiar with a current kind of flow where we would have our image at the top, our details below, and our big call to action at the bottom. And not just that, navigation too, right? We are so familiar with navigations being on in your top bar, where to find your cart. And I think we're all like, I guess also as creatives, we want to always kind of, improve, not improve things, but always kind of see how we can be different, or how can we make, how can we make something unique? And sometimes that kind of leads us to breaking mental models that people are already familiar with, and your interface could fail and your users can drop off. So, in terms of takeaways on this law specifically, is people apply expectations from familiar products to similar ones. When updating, ease change by keeping the old version available briefly. I actually really want to talk about this one specifically. I'm not sure if we have any iPhone users in the chat or on this call, but I do, and I nearly died when I saw Apple's new software launch, just because everything changed. I couldn't find my recent calls. My camera, I didn't know how to get to my camera settings, and it really confused me and it made me really frustrated, right? Because I was so used to a specific approach. I was so used to knowing where everything is. But to give Apple the credit, and I do love Apple, but to give them the credit, they did also allow me to, even though I've updated my software, to go back to the previous software. So that's just an example of keeping your old versions available briefly where possible. And then use existing mental models so users can focus on the tasks and not having to relearn an entirely new flow, having to relearn where they're going to find their menu, where they're going to find their call to action, where they're going to find their cart. Amazing. Then this is probably my favorite law. It's called the peak end rule. And the peak end rule is around dignity. So human-centered designs honor emotion as much as interaction. We remember how experiences make us feel. So if we look at the peak end rule in terms of what the UX law actually means, is people remember the emotional peak and the end. Again, if we look at that through a human-centered lens, what we need to do is try to reduce friction and always end positively. And look, when we're entering billing details, or if we're filling out an extensively large form, it does become pretty friction based. And how can we find minor elements of delight? So I know we shamed Duolingo a little bit earlier. Duolingo shames us too, so I don't even feel guilty. But at the same time, Duolingo also does a really, really great job at creating delight. And although it's a gamification type of app, they really do reward you in a way, or they introduce micro animations or this pointing system. And it always, as much as you felt guilt tripped, or as much as you sucked at your previous lesson, you're always coming back, right? Because they've added such really amazing peak experiences within their flows. Anyway, so I'm just sorry, I'm having a giggle at the chat. I want to show you guys a little graph on the right-hand side. You can see peak is there in the center. Experiences, see this graph as an entire experience, right? Experiences aren't smooth or linear. They have little highs and little lows along the way. But people don't always remember all of those little lows and those little highs. They mainly remember two key moments. And those two key moments is the peak and the end. The peak is the biggest emotional moment we can design on purpose through small wins, rewards, or really small moments of delight. It doesn't have to be something extravagant as everything animating on your page. And then your user also remembers the end, how the experience wraps up. A good ending leaves the user with positive final feeling and makes them more likely to come back. Thanks, Duolingo. I know it's not always possible to introduce this gamification, or it's not always possible to introduce points or whatever the case may be. So I just wanted to share another two examples where, Headspace, of course, they have really beautiful illustrations, beautiful graphics. It's a really way of creating, this peak. It's the way you communicate with the humans too. It's a softer kind of tone instead of sounding robotic is really important. Another beautiful example is just modals that introduce a little bit of a delight. Communicating with a human where they are in a step-by-step process. In these delight moments or in these peak moments, it's where, we all follow design systems, and I think we have what we call a toast or a snack bar. And sometimes those are just really small little elements that, can really be brushed off quickly or not seen. We want to actually encourage everyone to see how we can bring more delight to your entire human experience. So just a few takeaways from the peak end rule. Pay close attention to your most intense points and the final moments, which is the end of your journey. Identify the moments when your product is most helpful, valuable, or entertaining, and designed to delight your end user. Remember that people recall negative experiences more vividly than the positive ones, and that is why delight is so important. Awesome. Then the last rule or law that I want to run you guys through, I'd love for you guys also to afterwards just go and have a look at the general UX laws. There's so many other cool ones, and I could spend all day taking us through them. But the next one, and this is also a value that Estrella as a studio really holds closely in our day-to-day relationships internally with clients, as well as how we design. And that is Pastel's law, which is all about compassion, designing for human error and not perfection. Humans make mistakes. Our interfaces should forgive them, even though we can get frustrated with them sometimes. Then if you look at Pastel's law as a whole, the UX law actually speaks to being liberal in what you accept, conservative in what you send. If we look at that through the human-centered lens again, it's let's handle human error gently. People who are on our apps, on our websites, they're from all walks of life, and they understand things very differently to how we do. So again, just a little bit differently structured, but what I've shown here is an example of what I would feel is not really designing or creating an experience through compassion. I'm filling out my email address. I do have an error, but I don't know what that error means. No one is communicating to me why my email address is an error. My mom would be feeling the same way I do. I'm obviously very used to filling out forms because I'm in the creative space, because I'm in the design space. But we need to remember we're designing for people who are not in our fields. Another example is if we can store data on our system, like a list of locations, just as a small example, I would find that we're not really designing or creating for compassion if we're just allowing a user to fill out where they live manually, not having the ability to delete their text, but you kind of have to hover over the entire one, delete it again, and you're not giving me a quick kind of, I know where I'm going, you have it listed already, which actually just leads to my next slide. This is beautiful to me because I filled in my email address incorrectly, but you're telling me that it's my format. And now I know, okay, let me look at it a little bit closely. I realize I've said leigh.com. That doesn't make sense. Instead of just saying error, I'm being a little bit compassionate in how I'm doing my error handling. And for example, with a location, how can we do a quick kind of fill in, or how can we, if stored in the database, how can we, as I'm typing in my location, how can I just quickly choose one that where I want to be. Amazing. So just takeaways on this law is always be flexible and empathetic towards any user's action or input. design for every possible input and context while staying reliable. It's our job to be reliable. Anticipate and plan for variation to create resilient designs, and adapt to variable input, set clear boundaries, and give clear feedback. So, what does this all mean for us as UX designers, UX researchers, or just being in the UX or UI space? What is our responsibility? When we design with dignity, transparency, familiarity, and compassion, UX stops being an interface. It becomes a human experience and not a user experience, one that feels safe, respectful, and intuitive. And when people feel that way, something powerful happens. Trust forms. Not because we asked for it or we forced you to trust us, but we truly, truly earned it as designers. Thank you.
Leigh, Kristen, thank you so much for that insightful, and I really appreciated the typography of this of these slides. Um, um, Lots of great feedback and comments in the comment section. I do just want to jump into the questions, and I want to remind everyone, if you do have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A section. But we'll jump into the first one from Caleb. He says, I really love the connection to bringing in the laws. What I have been interested in doing is creating some sort of system to be able to employ the correct law for the correct case. Have you been able to, or have you done something similar already?
I
Cool.
think,
Maybe
Chris, you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. Happy to jump in here. First off, thanks so much. I'm really glad, and we're glad that that part resonated with you. I think in terms of, how we can put this into practice, right? So it's always very much situation dependent. I think what would be quite useful is to maybe just take a step back and identify the underlying user need. So, is it that there's a need for clarity? Is there a need for predictability? Maybe there's like an issue of cognitive load. And then, I mean, we've got a pack of the UX cards that we like to sit as a team and kind of pull out and sort and sift through. But what's really useful is if you can match this to that principle or law, which can sort of help inform your decision going forward. I think that's always useful.
And look, Caleb, I also think that, as I said, there are a lot of laws, and sometimes it's not possible to apply every single one of those 22 laws. But at the end of the day, it's also a mental model. It's a way in which we think now. We can be in a space where we so quickly need to get a screen out or to get a flow out, or product owners or stakeholders have told us, okay, we need this flow, and it's our responsibility to kind of know a few of these mental models and see how we can apply those, where even if it's one or two, but apply those in our proposal back to product, and then advocate for those. I think stakeholders are always very keen to get the product out or to get the app out or the page out, but we're the advocates. We're the ones who have to speak up for the humans. I hope that helps.
Thank you. I hope that answers, Caleb. So I'll jump into the next question. And the next one is from Maru. As someone who dabbles in UX writing, I really resonated with this talk. I would imagine that the three pillars could compete with the organization's goals metrics. To use your example in the beginning, making a process clearer could mean people can take longer to convert. If time to convert is a key metric, stakeholders might resist adding friction into the process. Do you have any examples of this kind of pushback from stakeholders? If so, how did you handle it? What was the outcome?
Kristen?
I'm trying to think about it. Yeah, it's always difficult. I think, you you always have the needs of the stakeholder, but then you also want to advocate for the user, or here we're talking about the user as the human. It's very difficult. I think if time is a metric or a key metric here, there's always ways we can optimize it. So what we typically do is we'll do a lot of competitive benchmarking. We'll lean against, what is best UX and UI practice, and try and kind of figure out how we can find a middle ground between the two of them. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a specific example. Leigh, I don't know if you've got anything maybe to add there.
So I have one or two examples. The one was we've been working with a mental health and wellness brand for a really long time, and we had to fill in demographic, or we had to design for demographic questions. And we did a lot of research into demographics. And I think when you're working in a space of mental health, the information you share is really private in a way, or you don't want to share your name or your email address or whatever the case may be, because you don't want that kind of paper trail leading back to, okay, Leigh is, I don't know, struggling with some form of mental health issue. And what we had done was, for the client at the time, it was like, we really need these demographic questions because we want to see where people are struggling nationwide the most with X, or struggling the most in which age bracket, so that we can help support in that area with depression, as an example. Obviously, it was something the client or the stakeholder wanted, we need these, but we had to handle it with so much passion, not passion, but with so much empathy, because as I said, it's mental health is something that's extremely sensitive. So we introduced something really nice below every demographic question. It was because it was a really long list. We had, when you're asking for someone's age, instead of just asking for their age, we actually gave a little tooltip as to why are we asking for your age, to inform the people, or to inform the humans behind who's filling out this form. And yes, I got a little bit of pushback from the stakeholder, because that obviously takes a lot more dev work, or it maybe clogs up the page a little bit more. Then our responsibility as designers is to motivate why we're doing this. We're working with real people. We're working with mental health. And it might take a little bit of more dev work, of course, but there's a lot more, I don't know, there's a bigger win out of it. And you're most likely to have someone fill in those demographic questions if they actually understand the why.
I think also, Leigh, just to add in one more point there, I think it also comes down to user research and validating these things. I think it's always worth, we can plan and plan and plan and plan, but I think it's important rather to, do a bit of a stress test, take it out there, sit with the user, see what's working, and see what's not working. Because then you can actually go back to the stakeholder with solid research and stats and say, we tested it, we validated it, we found X, and then you can kind of use that as your compass to kind of navigate and find a way forward from there. It's always quite helpful.
Thank you. Let me just check. I think we've got one last question from Helman. Are there any situations where the user is not the human, perhaps a system, robot, or animal?
I'm having a good giggle at that. I'm personally, in what I do in a day-to-day at Estrella, I've never really worked directly with a robot or an animal. But I can say that my dogs do have a Instagram account, and I do have to change the language on my Instagram account for my dogs, because I'm actually communicating with other dogs. I don't know if that's a good way to answer the question, but Chris, I'm not sure if you've ever been in a situation where you're working with someone who's not human.
No, but I do get what you mean. It's like it's contextual, right? It's looking at what is the user persona and just, I think, adapting to that, really.
Thank you. I hope that answers, Armin. We don't have any more questions. I have shared